Hello and welcome to TechNow, the web series for ServiceNow administrators, developers, and builders of all skill levels. We have a wide variety of ServiceNow topics, and very pleased to have a guest with us today. We'll get to that in just a moment. Let's do our quick introductions, and he'll bring up his as well. My name is Chuck Tomasi, Senior Developer Evangelist at ServiceNow. Been here for a little over 10 years, and a customer for a couple years before that. Lots of experience on the platform, custom applications, integrations. You get the idea. Do some other videos that you may have watched. Thank you very much for that. And a number of hobbies that, happy to share with you some other time, but I want to keep this tight so we can get right to our main topic. And, I forgot to say, the Technorama band is back. So this
the
month,
Technorama band?
I'll be doing backing vocals and percussion. So introducing the man on the lute, Craig Stapp.
That's me. Let me tell you, it takes years to practice to get good at the lute. Anyway, so I'm the program manager of Cloud Labs, and I handle all the infrastructure for our training and certification department, where when we spin up classes and you get to get your own instance for that class, that's where my work comes in. I specialize in the cloud automation. I did orchestration and things of that nature before I started getting into the Cloud Labs. And I've been here for 6 years. I've been here since 2014 to now, at least to today. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I'm just kidding. But hopefully I'll be here for a while. But I've enjoyed it. I've been a co-host of TechNow with Chuck for since 2016. So now on to Mr. Duncan.
Hey folks, Jeremy Duncan here, platform architect on our solution innovation team, and also guitar player on our band, our TechNow band. So last week I think I was the bass. At least that was the air bass. So I've been on the ServiceNow platform since pre-Aspen, so about 9 years now. Started as a customer, was a customer for 5 years, and then worked for a partner for 3, and now here at ServiceNow. So don't quite have the time that these other guys do at ServiceNow, but definitely on the platform. 16 years of IT experience, and been heading, to Knowledge since 2013. Was a speaker at Knowledge 13, and then just a little personal information. Was a volunteer police officer for the city of Hendersonville, where I live, for 7 years. And then I enjoy camping with my wife and kids. Without further ado, pass it over to today's guest speaker, Wolfgang.
Thank you. So, hi, I'm Wolfgang, or just Wolf. I normally play bass in a band, but today I guess my role is going to be more like a lead singer for this group. I've been a developer at ServiceNow for 2 years. I've actually spent my entire career at ServiceNow working on the Now Experience UI framework, which is what I'm going to be presenting about today. So I'm really excited about that. I've also presented at Knowledge before this year on the same topic. I encourage you to watch that video. It's pretty compressed and condensed. I'm going to get a chance to go into more detail here, which I'm looking forward to. So let's move it right along.
So Wolfgang also has. I gotta promote your other. Work. You have the Barely Functional Developer YouTube channel, right?
Right. By the way, we were planning to go into that in our upcoming podcast appearance, right?
Yes, we will. And I just want to promote, if you're not watching that, there's some really good stuff. I mean, it seems fundamental at the beginning, but you want to build a base to get that going. So please go over to YouTube and find his podcast. I think we'll have a link in here somewhere. We also want to promote that we've got a link to that session you did at Knowledge in the resource. So if you're watching live on 24, go to the resource panel. You can find a whole bunch of great information in there. Our agenda today, we're going to give you a little bit of Now Experience background. Actually, Wolf is going to do that. I'm going to sit quietly in the background and learn along with the rest of you. And then we'll get into building that component out. We'll do some Q&A along the way, but most of it will be at the end. And again, if we don't get to your question, it's not because we don't love you, because we very much do. We do want to manage our time appropriately rather than be here for 6 hours, because I know you guys are going to have a lot of great questions and answers. We will answer that in the community and post that back. You'll get an email with a link directly to your question and answer in the next couple of days. So give us some time to do some post-production on that, and we'll get started on that. Want to make sure that you also know that we are still accepting nominations. I don't know if that's even entries for tell us about your app. Go to the bit.ly link you see on the bottom of there, bit.ly/tell us about your app. And we will donate $50 for every application you contribute. You don't have to upload anything. Just tell us what you've built on the Now platform and how it's benefited somebody. Real quick Q&A and up to $250. So submit up to 5 times. If you want to do more, that's great. But our budget will run out of $250 to help the UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. Thank you very much for all of you that have done that so far. And quick reminder, Breakpoint podcast launched earlier in August is now officially out. We will have another episode a day after we record this TechNow. So encourage you to subscribe. Go to the bit.ly link there. You see a theme here. We use bit.ly a lot in this group. bit.ly/sn-break-point. Breakpoint is the developer podcast where we're going to be talking to people like Wolfgang and Dave Slusher and lots of other internal people, as well as external people. We want to talk to customers and even old timers from ServiceNow. Get some great stories. So audio only, no demos, no PowerPoints, no update sets. Yes, Craig.
I was just listening to it this morning with Brad Tilton. It was good.
All right. Thank you very much for everybody who subscribed to that. Quick reminder, a lot of developers on here of all skill levels. We want to remind you, go over to developer.servicenow.com to get your free personal developer instance. You can try some of these things that we do on this podcast and webcast and all the other properties as well. Totally free outside of your organization's development stack. So if you experiment, turn on a plugin, try something, and if it works, great. You've got a proof of concept. If it doesn't, you move on and Z-boot it and start over and do it again like I do every 6 months or so. Like, well, that was fun, but it's getting to be kind of messy. It's your sandbox to play in. All of the APIs we've got are documented on developer.servicenow.com. Free learning plans that you can go and learn in the community events. If you want to find out what podcasts and webinars are coming up, it's under Connect Events. So there's our schedule of stuff that's coming up. Lots more. Blog. I can't even tell you all the stuff that's on there because it's a great resource for developers. Whether you are just starting out or you've got lots of experience on another platform and you're new to ServiceNow, or you've been around the block for a dozen years like I have, I still use a lot of information off of developer.servicenow.com and invite you to as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our lead singer and bassist, Wolf. Take it away.
All right. Thank you for that, Chuck. We're going to be talking today about building Now Experience UI components. And first of all, let me just lay some groundwork by talking about what we mean when we say components. So if you take a page, something like a workspace, they're composed of these individual pieces that encapsulate functionality. And the whole idea here is to build reusable chunks of UI that you can configure for different purposes so that you are able to iterate quickly and that you can build larger applications faster. And so we're going to be talking about how to build any of those little boxes that we have here in this diagram. And let's see here. So next, let me introduce what we mean when we say the Now Experience. I think some of you might be familiar with this, but it's important to understand that there's some building blocks that we have here in order to make this dream a reality. We have the Now CLI. So this is the set of tools that we provide to scaffold out those components, to build the components, and then eventually deploy those components to your instance so that you can actually make use of them in your UIs. So the next piece is the one I'll be focusing mostly on, which is the actual Now Experience UI framework. This provides the building blocks for actually providing those components, building up the functionality so that they can have the UIs and they can talk to the APIs where you need to get data in and out of your instance. And then the last piece is known as the Now Experience UI Builder. And so this is the graphical drag and drop interface. Once you have those components on your instance, you can add them to various pieces of your UIs. You can add them to landing pages, which is what I'm going to be using for the demonstration here. But there's other places you can use UI Builder as well. And there's a whole world of a whole world of information about that. You can go to our developer site for more information about that. I'm not going to be going real deep into the UI Builder part of things. Next slide. So here is how to get started. You're going to need to start by having the Now CLI installed. So I've already done that. I'm not going to bore you with showing that installation process, but it's available from public NPM. You just have to install it globally with the right command, which we have here at the top. Next thing you're going to need to do is log into the instance that you're using, the second command here. This is something I've also already done for the demo instance we're using here. You just give it the URL, your username, and your password, and you're good to go. And that'll apply in a couple different areas that I'll point out as I'm going through the demo. So that'll proxy your local development to the same data the instance is using, and that'll also deploy to that instance when you're ready to deploy your components. The last step to get started is to create your local project so you can start actually building components. And so for that, there's a command where you just give it the name you want for the project and a description, and then it'll build out a bunch of files. I'll show you what those files look like in a minute. And then we'll get building with it. All right, so next I'm going to go over just a little bit of the fundamentals. By the way, these slides are very similar to what I already covered in my theater session for knowledge. So if you want to refer back to that, there might be some details that get filled in by that, or feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll answer them for you. So there's 4 fundamental building blocks that you need to understand in order to use the UI framework. There's the state. Everything starts from each component having its own state that's encapsulated for it. And that state is an immutable value. If you're familiar with some other frameworks that make use of that, so React, Redux, there's a couple others out there that use that sort of pattern of state as a persistent immutable value, which is used to derive the view, which is the next step in the process. The view is what we show to the users in the UI, expressed through markup by the developer. And then once the view is shown to the user, the next step is the user interacts with that UI. And once the user interacts with it, this produces what we call actions in our framework. And so actions are the eventing model of how we wire up basically when events happen to actions, to updates occurring basically. And so those updates, all the business logic occurs in what we refer to as action handlers. And the action handlers is where the side effects occur in the application. It's also where you communicate with the servers. Those types of things happen in the action handlers. Another thing the action handlers can do is they can perform immutable state updates. They can produce new values of state, and then that restarts this whole process over again by showing a new view, users interacting, and then actions occurring again. Okay, I'm going to go forward to, actually, I think that's a good point for me to talk about. This is something I'm going to mention a little bit later on when we get to the point of deploying, but just for your edification, UI Builder has this interface where once you've configured the component with the right metadata, we can add it to any landing page, which is what I'm going to be demonstrating here. So this is like just the last piece of fundamental knowledge, which I'll be going over again, but this is just quick introduction to what you need to know about UI Builder at this point. And I think at that point, we are ready to deploy it. There's going to be one more command with the Now CLI that does the deploy by building the component, putting all the metadata into your instance, and then the last step is for you to drag and drop it into your actual landing page. So I believe with that, we're ready for the demo now. So I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of what we're going to be building here today. So this is going to be a knowledge-based article search. I'm starting with a pre-filled in value here of email, but I could put in something else. It will send a request, get back some articles, give me the short description of them, and then each one of them I can click on a button and I can open up and read the full details of that. Pretty straightforward, but it at least shows a little bit of interactivity and also the fact that we're going to be making some API calls, that sort of thing. So just to motivate you, like where we're headed towards with this. Okay, now I'm going to switch to my editor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop that dev server that was running. And I'm also going to go ahead and switch back to my starting point. So what I have here is a scaffolded out component. This was created through the Now CLI, and I went ahead and added some dependencies that I'm going to need. I'm going to go through the various files we started out with. So basically, the only change I've made to this since the Now CLI instantiating this component is I've added some dependencies. Those are for some of our experience components, some components we provide out of the box that you can use so they'll look the same as the components we provide already for all the workspace experiences, all the other experiences. Button, card, icon, there's tons of them available. So I went ahead and added those dependencies. I added one more dependency, which allows me to talk to the HTTP servers. And I installed all the dependencies. But other than that, this is stock. This is what you get out of the box right now. So you get, like I just showed you, you get the package JSON with some metadata pre-filled in for you. There's a few other files you get. You get a nowcli.json. This file you actually don't need to mess with for the most part unless you want to change what instance your proxy server is talking to when you're working locally. So by default, whatever you're logged into is what instance you'll be getting data from. And so I've already logged into the instance I need, so I don't need to change this file at all. There's the now UI JSON file. I'll be working with this later when we actually deploy to UI Builder. This is going to provide the metadata that I talked about a little bit ago for that. All right. And then, so the next important things we have are folders. We have an example folder. And the example folder basically just creates an instance of our component that right now I've called it KB search, and it added the vendor prefix in front of it for orb. So this is just basically going to, when I run my local development server, this is going to instantiate an instance of the component. And this here, if I needed to pass it any properties or configure it in any way, I could edit this page for the example, but I'm going to leave that stock. The next thing we have is we have the source folder. I'm going to close this stuff. So in our source folder, we have an index file, and this basically this is going to be organized by the various components we have. So it's created scaffolding created one out of the box for my KB search component, and it created an index file. And so this here is your basic component that's sort of like hello world in a way. We have the create custom element function here that came from our UI core library. We have the rendering technology we're using, which is a library called SnapDOM out of the box. And we have a separate file for all of our SAS, CSS type stuff. The next thing we have is the view that I talked about a little bit ago. It takes in the state, and it also takes in some functions that we can use for helpers like updating that state, which I'll use in a little bit. And then you just return the markup you want to see. Okay, and then the last thing you do is you call that create custom element with the name of the tag you're going to use. So if you remember from the example, that's what you use here. And then you just pass it a few configuration parameters like the view that we showed and the styles that are imported from the other file. Let me go ahead and start up the now CLI. Oops. So there's a command now CLI develop, and that's going to start my dev server locally. You'll see that it's going to proxy to this demo instance that we're using here, which is what I logged into earlier. Okay, and so once it starts up, I'm going to go ahead and open up the page here, and you'll see it's pretty boring right now because I've taken it back to the place where there's no content. So let me go ahead and plug in something here, and I'm going to go ahead and do a little window management here. All right, and so there we have it. We have a hello world. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start showing how to build just I'm going to build this in a few different phases. I'm going to start from just building a very static page. I'm going to add interactivity one step at a time. And let me know if there's questions as we go along too, just in case we have opportunities to answer them. So first thing I want to start from is that state that I mentioned. The way you do the state in your component is you start by defining an initial state. And so for this particular component, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the state for that search text that was in the top box that I showed. So I'm going to define search text. I'm going to start with email just since I know it has a few results when we get to the point where we're talking to the API. Okay, so next step is I need to use that in my view. So let me just start by showing if I reference it, now what I'll get is text there. Okay, so that's not real exciting yet. I'm going to go ahead and start putting in some more interesting markup. So let's say I want a header. And in my header, I want to have an input, right, for that. And then below that, I want to use a component from the library of components we already shipped, which is the now card. Now, this would be the point where if I hadn't previously installed the component, what I would do is I would look to our documentation on what components are available. So hold on, let me go to reference here. So there's under developer.servicenow.com, we have the component library. And in this case, I was looking for a card. So it gives me some information about the card, the API, all of that sort of stuff. So if I hadn't already installed it, this would be the point where I would add that dependency. But I've already done that. So I'm going to skip that step right now and jump right to using it. All I have to do here is add an import for it. And there we go. That's the one I wanted. So next step here is I want the value of my text input at the top to be from the search text. And I want to show my search results below it. I'm just going to put a placeholder. Oops. Wow. Autocomplete doesn't always help so much. Okay. So it's going to take a little longer to build this time since I added new componentry to it. But the incremental builds should be a little faster at that. Okay, so now we have this static view where I have the value in my input at the top, and then I'm going to show the results below it. This isn't dynamic yet, so let me go ahead and fix that by at some point I need to do an immutable update on the state search text here. So the way I do that is by responding to an event from the view. And in this case, I want the input event to be what changes that. So there's an event called onInput. And the way you define a handler for the event is it receives the event. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this helper that got filled in for me to update the state. And this works similar to, if you're familiar with React, how setState works within that world. What you do is you pass it an object. And in that object, you provide all the keys to the state that you want to be updated in the next value for state. So in this case, I want search text to become the event target value. So now when I save that, you change the value, and now it'll reflect in the bottom there. So that's a good start in terms of functionality, but this is not looking amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in some Sass here. Sort of clean that up a little bit. All right, there we go. So now we got it centered. We got the display looking like that. Okay, so one more thing I want to do, just a finishing touch to make this look a little nicer, is I want to add that little icon for making it clear this is for search at the top there. So I'm just going to add a component called nowIcon. I'm going to give it the icon for that magnifying glass look. And now I'm just going to add the icon import, save that, and there it go. Cool. So this is my first checkpoint. I was going to pause briefly and see if there's any questions or anything we want to go over before I move on to the next step, which is going to be adding the capability to actually do the searching and querying the data and all that sort of thing.
Wolf, we've got a couple that are forward-looking. I don't know how much you can divulge about our future plans, but maybe in a general sense, things like, do we have plans to build this on platform rather than having to install NPM, et cetera? The case that was given was, I've got a Chromebook. I can't do a whole lot of the component building off platform. So are there plans to integrate this, or will it always be a separate process?
What I can say is that the UI builder features, the drag and drop ones that allow you to build from components that already exist, it's going to get more and more sophisticated over time, and you'll be able to do more and more advanced things with it. I can't speak to any specific guidance on what features are coming and when, though.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair. Let's see. The other one that I've got is, how do we know what events are available?
Aha. That's one that I would recommend going to MDN, because one thing we didn't mention when we talked a little bit about, I think we haven't talked too much about how the evolution of this happened, like the background behind how we got to the point where we built a framework in the first place. And one of the reasons that we ended up doing that, I don't know if you want to provide some of the background, Chuck, but
Sure.
was to have control over the APIs that we're exposing to our users. And as much as possible, we want to use standard web APIs. And so in this case, there's standard browser events that are already provided by the various standards that browsers implement. And so the names of what you can do on Dash are all documented in those web standards. You want to
Beautiful.
fill in any more details on that?
Little historical context for you. The original UI was built around Jelly. It was an Apache framework that was template based. We used it for the forms and lists that most of you see in the standard UI when you log in, and you're going down the side menu bar and you see a form and a list. That's all rendered with Jelly. Has been for the last 15 years. However, Jelly became a little old for technology. It was hard to find a skill set for employees. You couldn't just, walk into any, resource agency and say, I need a Jelly programmer. They're like, what? So that's when, along about 2013, 14, we set our vision on a newer technology, AngularJS. It's just come out from Google and built the service portal technology around that. Many of you are familiar with service portal and AngularJS, and just did a video on that on last Thursday. It's been wildly popular. And however, a couple of years down the road, Google said, nah, we're going to drop that. So we're left holding the bag on another technology. But all right, we fool me twice, shame on me kind of thing. What can we do to insulate our customers so they don't have to keep re-implementing a portal, re-implementing the user interface? So we came up with this middle layer of web components called Now Experience. And that way, if the underlying technology changes, you're not aware of it. You're protected against that technical debt. The components you build today will, in all likelihood, still be valid, and you can find a skill set for them 10 years from now. It's not proprietary because it's based on those web standards. And as you just saw Wolf pointing out on the MDN, the standard events from the browser, all this good stuff that protects you against the technical debt. So that's the vision for the future. Is let's stop reinventing and reacting, no pun intended, to every new technology that comes out. Every 2 years, we're going, hey, we should be using this. And, what about version 20 of that? Slow down, because it wouldn't make sense for us as an organization to try and implement all of that, and you to try and re-implement a lot of that. And the standards are a wonderful thing. We just got to hang on to them for a little longer than a few years. So hopefully that sets the tone.
Awesome. Anything else we want to go over, or should I move on to the next step?
Let's go on to the next step. We'll save some other questions. Thanks.
All right, cool. So the first thing I want to do as part of the next step is I want to start showing how to use multiple components together and how they communicate with each other. So for this, what I'm going to go ahead and do is make it a little bit easier on myself. I'm going to copy and paste the same component here, and I'm going to rename this from this name to search results. Okay. And I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup in this file here. So I'm not going to need the contents of this right now. And I'm going to change the name of the tag. Okay, so in order to do my little refactor, what I want to do is I basically want to move this placeholder for my results from in the same component down into here. Let me just do that. Okay. And so now, and I don't need that state there anymore.
Hey, don't you need a bracket around that return?
Which return?
Parens. That one you're hovering over, don't you need parens around it? The now cards.
You actually don't in this case.
Okay. All right.
You can. It's optional, but it's not required. If you want, I can add them for you, though.
Man, I thought I had you on something. Oh well.
Actually, my formatter removes them if I add them. So apparently, it decided that they don't need to be there.
I see. Okay.
Anyway, so the next thing I want to do is I need to import that from inside here. Search results, and I'm going to use that tag in my first component. Put it right below the header here. Okay, and when I save that, what I should see is, yeah, so it kind of worked, but kind of not at the same time, right? Get this weird look here. So there's a couple of reasons for that. So first of all, I'm not passing the search text that I need. The other thing is that my SAS is kind of, let me remove that until I do that. Okay, so now it at least looks similar, but in order to make it functionally more equivalent, I need to get the search text. It's not part of the state here anymore, so I need to provide it from the first component into the second component. The way that we pass data is what's called properties. So in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is define configuration for properties. And the way properties works is each of the keys in here is the name of a property, and then the value is going to be a config object, which I'll show you in a moment. We are going to have search text as a property. And inside here, we can do a couple different things. I'm going to specify a default value. Let's see here. Give it some value here. And then the way we use properties within the view is they're actually included as part of state. I just do state.properties instead of state.searchText. And now, because I've defined a default for this property, I'm going to get the value something here. If I want to provide the value to the component instead of using the default value, the way I do that is I go back to this component here, and I pass it in to the tag right here. So I give search text, text equals, and then I get that value from state search text, like I had been using when I was just showing some static text there. So this is now functionally equivalent, but using two different components instead of one. So now what I can do is I can focus on that search results component, leave the first one alone, and now I can start filling in some actual functionality here. Let me go get rid of that. All right. So first thing I need to do here is I'm going to provide the state that I'm going to need. Two pieces of state I'm going to want for now. So there's that loading indicator that you might have remembered I show as the data is coming in from the server. So I'm going to have a show loading, and it's going to initially be loading. And then the other piece of state I'm going to need is what my current search results are that I fetched. So I'm going to add search results, and I'm going to default that to an empty array. Okay, and so now I'm going to replace this placeholder content here with something that, something that actually uses that state. Okay, so what I've got here is, one more thing I need to do is in my view, you'll see that in addition to the card, I'm using a loader component. So I need to import that. Okay, so what should happen now is because it starts out loading, it should be forever loading because I'm never changing it. But what I'm going to do in the view is if it is loading, I'm going to show that loader. If it's not, I'm going to show a list of results based on the number of results. So if there are any results, if the length's greater than 0, then I'll show each of them on a new list item. If not, I'll show no matches found. So let me show you those different states right now. So if I had not loading, but I have my search results as empty array, I'll see this no matches found. And if I had results in here, what it's going to do with each of the results is it's going to show you the short description. So let me fake that right now by having a short description. There. And so this should show that. Cool. And then if I had like maybe more than one just to show it. And what we're going to get here is both of these in the list. Okay, so that works, but it doesn't look the way I want it to. So this is where I'm going to go back to the SaaS, plug in just a little bit of cleanup on that, make the list look the way I want it to. Cool. That's good enough for that purpose. Okay, so now let me go back to no search results. Good. And let me go back to start out loading. Okay. Cool. So now the state looks like it's good to go. The view is good to go. The only thing I'm missing is the actual fetching of the data. So in order to do that, there's a couple things I'm going to need. I'm going to add an import there's a special export that's provided by the core, and this provides some actions that we can use that are part of the lifecycle of the component. And I'll be hooking into those in order to do the fetching logic. And then the last thing I'm going to need to add is I'm going to need that library that we use in order to talk to the HTTP. All right. And for that, I'm going to import a helper function called create HTTP effect. Okay. So the next step here is I'm going to start filling in how to handle those actions that I'm going to need to handle. For that, in my component config, I add a property called act handlers. Okay, and I'm going to save a little bit of typing with a snippet here, but I'm going to go carefully over everything that's happening in it. So let me plug this in first. Okay. So the first action handler I'm going to add is I'm going to use that action types that I imported from the library, and I'm going to say when your component initially loads, and that lifecycle is called component connected. There's a bunch of other ones that are all part of our documentation. There's a corresponding disconnect when the component unmounts as well. That's going to use a helper function that I haven't defined yet, but I'll get to in a second. And that helper function is going to create an action that will contain a data based on the state of my component to make the request I want to make. Okay. And that's going to be reusable because I'm going to actually have that later on for another purpose. The next action is a custom one I defined, and this one is going to actually make the HTTP call. So it's using the helper I imported from the library, create HTTP effect. So the first thing I give that is the URL I want to talk to, and that can have path params for placeholders. So I'm using the table API here, and I tell it that I'm going to provide a path parameter for which table to communicate to. I also say that I'm going to provide a query parameter, which I'm going to use to provide the query, and that's going to give me just the results I want. The next action I give is when the request starts, there's another action you can hook into if you want to do any updates then, which I will. And then the last one I'm using is on completion. When the request finishes, what will happen is another action will get dispatched. And this is generally how all the wiring of different things happens together in the UI framework, is that you have these chunks where actions feed into them, and then actions get dispatched back out of them if you want to hook into other events that happen later on. And so for each of those, we make small state updates. For the start, we make sure to always show the loading indicator using our helper for the update state, immutable updates. And when we get the results fetched, this is where we take the data from the action, the payload, and we stick that into search results. And then we set the loading to no longer loading. So there's one more thing I need in order for this to work, which is that helper, the request search results that I mentioned. Just gonna plug that in here real quick. And so what this is going to do is it's going to look to make sure that we have search text provided to our component. And if we do, it's going to dispatch that action that's going to actually kick off the HTTP request. And it's going to provide some data about, okay, I want to get knowledge articles from the KB knowledge table, and I want the short description to be like the text that I have for my search text. Okay. So when I save that and this reloads, what will happen is we'll get it'll load and it'll use the initial value of that property for email. But what you'll notice here is this doesn't update. And the reason why is because we're only making that request initially when the component connects. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add one more line so that it will update as your values update. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to add one more lifecycle here. So in addition to component connected, we have a component property changed. Oops, and my syntax is off because I deleted a character there. So what I should be able to do here now is I should be able to type in a different value. So you might have noticed that it worked, but something weird happened as I was typing. It was making multiple queries and showing the updates multiple times. So this is where something helpful to add something like a debounce to it. And that can be any kind, really. I'm going to use the one from Lodash, but there's plenty of other libraries that can handle this sort of thing. And what I'm going to do in order to use something like a debounce is I'm going to wrap this function here in debounce, and I'm going to give it a wait time of, let's say, 250 milliseconds. That feels pretty good when you're typing, I think. So what will happen now is it won't start fetching until I've finished typing for at least a quarter of a second. Okay, so that was the next step I was going to take in this, and I covered a lot of things here, so I'm going to take a brief pause and see if there's any questions I should cover.
Oh, yeah, we got tons of questions. Some are pretty deep cuts, too.
Yeah.
Give me a simple one. Can we deploy React-based component of ServiceNow? That's I think that's one that I might have to get back on. I know I know that there's like technical ways to make it happen, but whether they are allowed ways is what I can't answer right now. Sure. Well, that kind of gets into another question. How can we deploy the component from one instance to another?
I don't know if that functionality currently exists. I'd have, and I know a lot of things are being worked on. I don't want to speak to what's in the pipeline at this point. But right now, the workflow I'm going to be going over is deploying locally to an instance.
Okay, and would you have to use the Now CLI to deploy that into subprod as well as prod? Or is it captured by some update that you, or scope that you could put in repo? How would you get that from subprod to prod effectively?
Okay, yeah. So I should say that each of these components is going to be deployed as a scoped app when I get to that step. And so I haven't tested this, but I think if there's an existing process for migrating those between instances, that should work. But I don't want to speak out of turn or with things I haven't tested yet. Okay.
Is there a defined list of ServiceNow supported libraries?
Supported means what in this case?
Well, you just pulled in the one from Lodash, correct, to do the debounce?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so the tools that I'm using here will be able to bundle any library. So, I mean, it really just comes down to what you're legally allowed to include and will work in the environment. And by work, I mean because the only caveats I would say is that there are some older libraries that weren't built with the newest web standards in mind and aren't always compatible with them, with like web components and Shadow DOM are the two main technologies that not every library is built to accommodate necessarily.
Gotcha.
So I would say generally have to be newer libraries for it to work.
Okay. All right. Did you have any more demo to finish up?
Yeah, I did have one more piece here if we got time for it.
Go for it.
All right, cool. So the last piece was to be able to show the details or the full values of each of them. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more piece of state, which is to be able to have a selected result. and that's going to initially be null. And the next updates are going to be in the view. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add, so if there is a selected result, I'm going to use another component called now modal, and it's going to show another component called now rich text. I'm basically just plugging up different components that are already provided out of the box, which is nice to do all this. And let me import those, modal and text. Okay. And then the last thing I need is I need something to open up these or select the search result. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in each of the list items for the search results, add a little button before each of them that has that info icon, and that's going to set the the selected result state that I added earlier. So I just need to add an import for, oh, I guess the button does actually come along with one of the other ones because they contain buttons, but I'm going to be a good citizen and I'm going to import it separately just so I get proper dependency management here. All right, and so what I should see now is when I click on one of these, I get the full details of it. And this is a responsive UI, so if I were to make the browser bigger, instead of taking over the full screen, the modal looks like a regular modal that you might be used to here. Okay, so that's all the functionality. The next piece I want to show is how do we get this into UI Builder and used on an instance. So for that, what I'm going to do is one more update. Close that. And, oh, I'm showing ahead already. Let me do the local update first. Okay, so the last piece I need for that is the metadata that we talked about earlier. In my now UI JSON, I have a placeholder for my component already here, and it has an empty inner components, but what I want to add is a couple pieces of data here. So there's a UI Builder section, and this tells us like where it's allowed to be used, what label to show, what icon to show when we use it in UI Builder, that sort of stuff. And then some metadata about what other components we need to use with this. So I'm going to add that there. And the last step to get it into UI Builder is to do a now CLI. And that got messed up again. Hold on, sorry. I think it was because I resized all this stuff here. Open this. All right. So now I'm going to do a deploy from the now CLI. So what this is going to do is it's going to deploy to that same instance that I already logged in earlier for the demo. First step is it's going to make a build of that component, all the resources that it's going to need. And then once that build finishes, it's going to start adding all that metadata. It's going to create a scope on my instance for it. It's going to add resources that are needed for UI Builder. And it was successful. So let me show you how I use that now. Let's see here. So first off, this is the instance that I just deployed to. I just want to start by showing you the homepage, landing page for Agent Workspace is basically out of the box. Now I'm going to open up, this is what UI Builder looks like, and I don't have time to go over all the features of it, but basically you've got your landing pages here on the left to select. You've got your canvas for dragging components into. You'll notice that when I go to add component, my search is available there now. So let me go ahead and create a new page for it. And I'll call it KB search just to be exciting here. Whoops, not cancel. Sorry. All right, create. And let's add it. So what I do is I just literally drag it, drop it here, and then it gives me a preview of what this will look like when it's actually running. So I'm just going to activate it like so. Go back to the home page and refresh. And if everything worked out, we should see our component. Awesome. So I can use it just like I've been using in the demo. I mean, it looks a little bit different in here in the environment that it's running in, but other than a couple of style changes because of the difference between how it gets deployed and how it gets actually rendered, you've got all the same functionality that you built locally. And that's it for my demo. Now I can answer whatever questions we have in the little bit of time we have left.
So from a generalization standpoint, this asked, we do have plans to deploy this further than landing pages. There's more places in the workspace where you'll be able to put components. You'll be able to build an entire portal this way in the not too distant future. So look forward to a lot more on the roadmap. This is our strategic UI direction. So I thank you for demystifying a lot of the nuances in there. That was huge. I've already got requests in the Q&A for where will this be posted as a video? I want to go rewatch it. This is going to get a lot of life after this. So,
nice.
Looking forward to that.
And actually, I was going to stop screen sharing, but the one last thing I wanted to mention that we should probably put in the resources is this is heavily based off of an existing example that's already on our public GitHub, which I can show real quick right now. So we have this repo that has some now experienced component examples. And so what I'm showing is very similar to the agent assist example for showing knowledge-based articles. It's just been slightly tweaked and modified to make it easier to show the building of it. But the code for what I showed is very similar to that example. That was the last thing I wanted to share on that. Should I stop sharing, or did you want me to keep that going?
Let's stop sharing. I think we can run it up against the clock, and I don't want to. Let's see if we can get one more in here. We asked about that. How do we find the UI? How do we find the UI builder in our developer instance?
Yes. So I can show you how to open landing pages in UI Builder. There's all those other places that we talked about, but on your instance, if you look up one of the landing pages, then there is an option to open it in UI Builder. In terms of how to access the other parts of it, I would have to defer to someone who's more familiar with UI Builder.
All right. Good stuff.
Did you want me to demonstrate that, or do we not have time for that?
No, we should be good with that. We've got, oops, I think I switched our slide. So take us to the takeaways.
All right. There we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, so hopefully I've shown that it's, there was no real magic other than the npm install commands that I ran in order to get started with building components and deploying them into workspace. So I want to, make it clear that there's no real secret sauce going on here. We're using the same tools that a lot of other front-end developer communities are already familiar with. So I hope you take advantage of that and get started. I also want to, encourage you to learn the fundamentals of the framework. And for that, I would encourage you to go to developer.servicenow.com and read the rest of the documentation we have on the UI framework. We've been improving that a lot and putting a lot of our, fundamentals, philosophy, those sorts of things that you should understand, because I only was able to cover a small portion of it in the time I had today. And that's my last takeaway already. Basically, is that go to the developer site for all that information that I wasn't able to provide.
Excellent. Thank you again. Well, that was awesome information.
That was good.
Quick promo. I'm definitely going to go watch it again because I was manning questions and answers in the background and want to get more familiar with that. But next month, TechNow will be doing a way to make your upgrades even easier. So simplify your next upgrade. We've got another special guest. Jivanjot Kaur will be joining us, and she is on the product team that's been working on the Paris Upgrade Center. You saw a little bit of this if you watched Live Coding Happy Hour a couple of weeks ago, where Andrew went through the post-upgrade process on one of our sub-prod instances. We're going to be going in even deeper with that discussion. So you can already register for that. Our crack team of campaign people making links and cool cover art like this is helping us out. This is a team effort. It's not just something that Craig and Jeremy and I think of last night and go, hey, let's talk about this. That was Andrew and me in 2013. Now there's actually a thought process that goes on behind that. So I invite you to go and register for that as soon as possible. Put that on your calendar, and we will see you September 15th to talk about upgrades. Again, a lot of information was presented here, and you can find more of it at Docs and Developer and Community for your questions. We've been doing this for a long time. We're at episode 78. It's hard to believe. And Craig's been around for about 60 of those. So I think you're my longest running co-host now, Craig. Thanks.
Oh, good. Hey, by the way, I got some news for you. I'm just kidding.
What?
I'll be here next time too.
There were a lot of great questions in there. Some of these would be great community questions, and we will be answering them offline, getting them posted back to the community, and you'll get a message with how to find that link with the answer in a couple of days. Give us just a couple of days to answer the questions and get the video processed, and we'll have that on YouTube as well. So that takes us about to the top of the hour. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again, Wolf, in a few minutes, and we'll have that on the Breakpoint podcast in a couple of weeks. So it's a busy time around here, and happy to share. Thank you, Wolf. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Craig, for joining us today, and the entire team behind the scenes that helps put this together. My name is Chuck Tomasi, and I will be talking to you again real soon about lots of other cool ServiceNow technical stuff. So till then, everybody take care, be safe, and be kind to each other. Bye.